Jack, man, how's it going? Welcome to the show.
Jordan, bro, thank you for having me. Really, really excited, man. Really excited. How you doing, man? How's your morning?
I'm doing great. I was cracking up. We were just talking a minute before I hit record here that I sent you my calendar and I was like, hey, dude, like just go ahead, slot yourself in anywhere. I knew there's a huge time difference here in Australia. And I was like, just thinking, I use Calendly. So I was like, it's going to show you all times in your time zone. So I thought, okay, easiest thing is just give him that link and see if there's something that just matches up. And you were like, yeah, great. Found a spot. No problem. And I was like, okay, cool. So I quickly glanced at what time you picked. And I thought for sure it would be that my earliest time was 8 a.m. And it turns out that that podcast link is like basically just shows my entire calendar. And you picked a time that was 7 a.m., which is hysterical because I'm up already. It's no problem. But I did not know that until like 11 p.m. last night. And then I thought like this time must suck for you. And then I like Googled the Australia time difference. So like what time? It's 7 a.m. for me, which it's like it kind of is not the best time to podcast, I guess, but it's got to be worse for you. It's what time is it there?
Yeah, well, it's 10 p.m. here. So, but it's better than when I looked at the calendar at first. I was looking at the times. So it's come up in Australian time. I saw 3 a.m., 3:30 a.m., and 4 a.m. And I was like, nah.
Those would have been the earliest times. Those would have been the early times. Gotcha.
Yeah, then I scrolled down a bit. I was like, okay, yeah, sweet. It's like 10 or 11 p.m. I can do that. I can deal with that. Like, I'm sure we'll get onto like coaching stuff in a bit. But being an online coach, you get to set your bedtime a little bit later if you want to. So,
sure.
Little better.
Yeah. Have you done any podcasts with people in America or just in Australia?
Nah, man, you're the first one. Popping the American cherry. Mostly just Australians. So yeah, but I'm looking forward to this, man. I've listened to a few of your episodes before in preparation. So yeah, man, I'm really keen.
Cool. That's awesome. And you asked me before we started, you're like, can I swear? Not only can you swear, I encourage you to swear. And I also encourage you to use like purely Australian slang. And then I'll put like some form of dictionary, like Australian urban dictionary for my listeners. So they understand what the fuck you're talking about. We watched, I should not have started the sentence, but I've started it. So I will keep going. We watched, I think a season of Love Island with Australians at some point, and I literally was just like looking at Jenna. I'm like, what the fuck are they talking about? I'm like, what the fuck does this even mean? I'm like, first of all, one, I don't know what any of this means, and two, we need to start incorporating some of this lingo immediately.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm the worst mix because I was born in the UK and then moved to Australia when I was 7 years old. So I've got the UK slang and the Aussie slang. So I can just make no sense in two different accents, basically, if I want to. Like,
yeah, that's awesome.
So yeah, if you need like a few like little pop-ups and stuff throughout the episode and everything, just kind of like,
cool. Definitely.
Little, what the fuck in the show notes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I always joke around that like, I look at your content. You have great content. It's like really, I like to start the podcast. Usually I would have done it by now, but I like to start a podcast with actually telling my listeners why I wanted to have you on. Like they know me and they kind of know what my podcast is about. So like, who's this dude? You'll tell us who this dude is in a second, but I'm going to give you a little intro. It's like, as a technique nerd myself, you have like by far some of the best, most simplified, most accessible content, which is a good thing because it can get quickly not that. It can become out of hand complicated. And so it's also like a little bit of an unfair like advantage with this like fire accent. And so I'm considering like looking in Final Cut to see if there's like an Australian plugin that I can just like lay over the I'm like talking to my producer, the guy who produces the podcast. I'm like, hey, what can we do about this accent situation? Turns out not anything. So unfortunate, but yeah, that's why I wanted to have you on. Your content's super great. Like your account's blowing up and for good reason. I think that there's a good, I was going to say niche, but that's a term I fucking hate, but there's like a good spot for people who can digest complex information and kind of spit it out in the way that you, and similar to like the vibe that I get from like the Carol's page, and you guys know them or you know them. And so I'm not surprised, frankly. I think that you're coming from that, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree there.
Yeah, no, firstly, thanks, man. I appreciate that a lot. But yeah, like that's a big thing for me is obviously, you've done all the N1 courses and all that. I think, you were lucky enough to go to one of the in-person practicals. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I've obviously done a few of their courses. But for me, a lot of my background comes from, like my in-person coaching with Mark one-to-one for the last 2 years, Mark Carroll. Just started working as well with Glenn Carroll too. So working as part of Atlas Coaching. So yeah, for me, a big part of it is taking the the more complex things and taking that biomechanics stuff, I do love it. I do love the whole idea of being able to move really well and kind of lining things up and having that kind of nerding out about things. But yeah, making it digestible for, you know, the average gym goer. You know, so for me, like, I always tell people my favorite client is still my mom. You know, she's my day one client. I've trained her 2 to 3 times a week ever since I started as a PT. And for me, it was always a case of, I want to be able to take these concepts and be able to explain them in a way that my mom understands. And, you know, she was always kind of like my initial client avatar, if you will. You know, being able to go into the gym with her and, you know, get her doing certain exercises and, you know, explain to her what a resistance profile is, and explain to her, like, why are we pausing here? Why are we doing the quarter rep here? Why does it make no sense that your arm's up at this angle? You know, like, so yeah, always wanted to be able to explain things in more simplified manners. And you're right. Like, I think spending a lot of time learning from the Carrolls especially has been really good for that, because, you know, Mark especially is so good at, you know, he's incredible at it. He just takes these things that are really high level and he's just like, yeah, here you go. And everyone's just like, well, okay, yeah, sweet. So yeah, it's been really helpful.
Yeah, that's I trained my mom when I was an in-person PT for like 2 or 3 years, like 2 or 3 times a week. Total side tangent. It was like one of the, like, in those 2 or 3 years, like, it was such a great thing for me and my mom, like, as our relationship. Like, got to spend so much quality time with my mom. I absolutely loved training her. She's a super, super duper strong. And it's funny, it's like, I'm obviously a guy, and you assume that you get like whatever, like, I don't know, I think that this doesn't make any intellectual sense, but people are like, oh, you get your, like, dude, your genetics from like your dad, let's say. But like, my mom, when she started lifting, was like not a hyper responder, but out of nowhere was like super duper jacked and very strong. And her technique was really good. And I'm thinking to myself the whole time, like, my dad was like an athlete. And I'm like, I think I got my, you know, relatively quality genetics from you. I'm like, I'm looking at you responding to this. And I'm like, holy crap. Like, you look amazing. She gained a ton of muscle and totally took to hypertrophy style training and all that stuff. And so I love, that was a lot of good quality time. My mom, I'm sure, same with you. And so it's been a nice experience doing that.
Oh, absolutely, man. And yeah, same sort of thing. Like, I used to go in and train mom and I'd be like, your delts, your triceps, what the hell? I'd be like, they're bigger than mine. This is unfair. What's going on? But
Also,
yeah, 100%. Like, you get that, you know, it's nice to be able to spend time, especially like getting into my early mid-20s and kind of spending a lot more time away from home and everything, you know, getting to catch up with mom and also see her, you know, rep out like sets of 10 body weight pull-ups and all that sort of stuff. It's like, it's crazy. Yeah.
yeah, it's badass. Take us back a little
100%.
bit. Tell me a little bit more about Jack getting into the industry as a person growing up, any of those things that might seem relevant to who you are today.
Yeah, sure. So I was a bit of a late bloomer when it came to training. I'm not going to lie. I'm almost 26 years old now. You know, 26 going on 46 some days, but you know, but I actually didn't step foot in a gym properly until I was about 20 years old. So one thing that I find Australia doesn't do enough of in school is we push sport a lot. So I was always playing cricket, always playing soccer. You know, even had like a little stint of rugby when I was a kid and stuff, but we don't push the kind of like getting in a gym for teenagers and younger guys, especially. It's very much kind of like you sort of wait until you're, you know, 18 out of school. Whereas I know in the States, there's that massive kind of like, you know, high school football culture and, you know, getting in the gym and, you know, being in and around the weight room and stuff when you're in high school. We really didn't have that. So it wasn't until I actually tore my ACL in my right leg playing cricket. And then 2 years later, did my patellar tendon in my left knee playing soccer. And I was just kind of like, you know what, I need something that doesn't require me to change directions because I'm obviously rubbish at that. So yeah, I got into training when I was about 20 years old, and I started off, you know, doing all the typical push-pull legs, like, you know, those kind of splits, watching guys like Christian Guzman on YouTube and all that sort of thing. And I pretty much just kind of, yeah, I was studying music at the time, and I play guitar, and I was studying performance and everything, and I was really loving it. I was really enjoying it, but I didn't really see it kind of going anywhere as a career. I tried moving back to London for a little bit, didn't work out. But the main reason I got into music was I wanted to enrich people's lives. I wanted to do something that people could relate to, that could make people feel better on like a day-to-day basis, even if it was only for like 3 minutes a day hearing a song, basically. And, you know, I just started getting into training, and I was kind of seeing how training was making me feel. And it was the closest thing to how I felt when I was listening to songs that I loved and playing along to songs that I loved on my guitar. And I sort of thought to myself, you know what, why not give this personal training thing a go? You know, this is making me feel really good. I wonder if I could make other people feel really good by doing the exact same thing. And I was kind of like, well, you know, if I do that, it's no longer just for 3 minutes. It could be for 30 minutes or 45 minutes or 3 times a week, you know, sort of thing. So I went and got my certs over here in Australia. It's a Cert 3 and Cert 4 in fitness. That's all you need. It took me 6 months. Straight out of that, I was into my first commercial gym job. And, you know, 2 days into that, I had my first PT session. And, you know, I look back on it now with cringing red and embarrassment with the program that was used. I think there was a giant set of sled push kettlebell swings and 500 meter on the rower or something like that. And yeah, I think we've all been there. But yeah, after that, you know, the rest is kind of history. I've always had a real like penchant for wanting to learn and wanting to educate. I think I was about 3 months into my PT life when I found Mark Carroll's initial guidebooks, like his Gen Pop and stuff. Started just reading everything that came out of him and clean health. Started being like, oh, okay, there's actually education I can do with this as well. I don't just have to go in and be like, all right, 10 sets of bench press and do this or whatever, you know, then get out. Like, and I started looking into, you know, people like Lane Norton, for example, as well, and found John Meadows on YouTube as well. And, you know, basically just kind of got lucky basically early on that I was like, okay, there's some really smart people in this industry and I can learn a lot more than just, you know, bro splits and TRX rows and stuff like that.
Yeah, you say lucky, and that is I'm actually going to agree that there's like some element of that, like where you can go down, and I don't regret some of the paths that I went down, but I think where you were a late bloomer, I think it sounds like you were an early bloomer with like the right places and the right pieces of education, and cut through a lot of, I'm sure you did dumb shit early on in PT career. We all did, you know, the fucking kettlebell rower, you know, body weight box jumps situation. We've all been there. And I remember some of the stuff that I used to preach, but the gym I was at was such a big echo chamber of bullshit that it was before I was deep into the online space, and I had other like slightly more educated, more probably, you know, all things considered, more correct information coming into my brain. And it was just this echo chamber of nonsense. And I was stuck there mentally. And I think getting so stuck there, like did like stunt my intellectual growth in that way. But it also, when that time came, when I like blossomed, let's say, into like finding out some of this more information, definitely felt in like just invigorated and excited to make up for lost time almost. Like I just remember that time being more dedicated to learning and reading and podcasts and courses and going here and spending money on self-improvement, because I was just like, holy shit, you spent the last 5 years in this bubble of bullshit. And very grateful for that. And just like think that every trainer, coach, and even the regular person listening to this is going to one day like feel like they've been enlightened at some point. I've had people reach out and they're like, oh my God, I was spinning my wheels for the last 20 years or something. It's like, doesn't matter as long as you like, some of that stuff is necessary. Like, do you feel like you look back on that? Like you said the word cringe, like I look back on that, I cringe like crazy with some of the diet stuff that I used to say and prescribe. But I also think that that's part of the journey. Like there's nobody, like it's rare someone's like pops out of the womb and like it becomes Lane's understudy or something like that. Like you feel like you're like, you don't look back on that time like and think, okay, you know, I was, you know, like you look back on it almost as like a necessary evil.
100%, man. Like I think it's like any avenue in life, right? Like you got to make mistakes to get better. You know, if you're constantly thinking that everything you do is, you know, so amazing, and you come straight into PT and you just think, all right, sun's shining out of my asshole, like I'm just, you know, absolutely like crushing this, but like you look back on the programs 10 years later and you're like, oh dear, sort of thing. Like that's how you want it to be, right? Like you want to still be confident in what you're doing, you know, because I think like the average lifespan of a PT is something like 12 months here in Australia. Like it's not very long. So you want to still be confident in what you're doing, but you know, you do have to make mistakes to learn. And I think it's just being open-minded when somebody tells you, hey, like you could have done that better, or here's like a different way. And I mean, you see it on social media all the time. You probably get it in your comments section all the time. Like I know I do. People being like, oh, but it's been done like this for 20 years, so it's got to be right, sort of thing. And it's like, well, that could just mean it's been done ineffectively for 20 years, you know, like it's, so I think, yeah, you have to be able to make mistakes and learn from them. And yeah, you're right. You have to be able to look back sometimes and just laugh. You have to kind of be able to be like, like I did do that. It's kind of funny, but I don't do that now. So
Totally. Yeah. I think there's some element of looking back on a program you made 12 months ago and being like, oh boy, I would have done this, this, and this differently. And I think if you look at it from a positive, I want to improve mindset, it's a lot better than like oh my God, I sucked. I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. And it becomes a negative thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like like you said, you always know a level of something at the time. And it's always about kind of being like, okay, I'm here now. And in 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, where do I want to be? Like, do I want to be able to look back on this and go, this wasn't terrible. Of course it wasn't, but it wasn't the best. I could have done a little bit better. Of course you do. You want to always be having that progression, and you just don't want things to get stale, I guess.
Yeah. So let's move into this first topic here. I personally have started my online coaching journey doing a lot of one-on-one coaching. And my one-on-one coaching tends to be on the spectrum of like, I want to charge more because I want to give more. So mine was also always very immersive. I do a lot of Zooming with clients. I am open to text message discussions. And so very accessible, a lot of communication. And that was really great for me. I mean, that was what we would say like very deep. I went very deep on that. And I was able to have like Zoom one-on-one clients and, screen share and go over your form video and draw angles. And I love that. I mean, that was like, I still do love that. I still do that. And that's always been great because I've been able to have some of these conversations about pursuing like more optimal technique and kind of adding some context around some of the stuff that I was saying. And then I started a group program, which I absolutely love. And it's so much fun. I'm so amazed with everyone in there, but it now limited my ability to have those super in-depth conversations. And I'll get to the question in a second, I promise. But I was starting to get people who would send form videos. And that's one of the things that I offer in the group program. I'll 100% answer everybody's form video. But it was difficult to also sometimes add the context of how important it is, the critique that I'm giving. Like, and so if I'm giving a critique, like just understanding where this critique falls in the hierarchy of what's important, where if I'm asking you to move the cable down one click so that we can more optimally hit the iliac lat, let's say, like where does that rank in the hierarchy of importance, and how close are you to already what is really, really great? And is this a make or break thing? So my question to you is, I've been on a bit of I was going to say tirade, but probably not that serious, but like this idea of like, don't let the pursuit of perfect techniques stop you from enjoying the process. And I'm just going to stop there. I'm just asking you what you think about that. And just from somebody who almost exclusively talks, exercise technique and biomechanics and exercise selection, execution and stuff like that. Do you find that you're having that discussion sometimes as well, even while teaching people how to optimize technique?
Yeah, 100%, man. I think that's a really good point to raise, because I think, so from my standpoint, really what I try to look at is I try and kind of take the pursuit of quote unquote perfect technique, because let's be real, that's going to look slightly different for everyone. And I try to make that a part of enjoying the process. So what I try and coach with clients is, rather than kind of saying, look, I'm going to be this form Nazi and I'm just going to ride you like constantly for the next 6 weeks until you get it right, just kind of annoy the hell out of you and stuff. And kind of like, trying to frame it in a way whereby, take an RDL, for example. Like, I know you've talked on your profile before about RDL being like one of those lifts where you look at, once you just kind of execute it perfectly that first time, you just kind of like, yeah, that's a work of art sort of thing, right? And I agree, like it's one of those things, and I try and frame my clients' mindset to be, that's what they want. Okay, so like when they're training in the gym, it's all pushing towards whatever result they want. So, if they're trying to get stronger, if they're trying to get leaner, if they're trying to put on muscle mass, whatever they're training for, that training is like supplementing that. But when they're in the gym, that number one like goal of the process is to be able to nail that set. So, if they're going into their set of RDL, I want that knee position to be like perfect. I want that hip position to be perfect. I want the chin to be slightly tucked. I don't want to see like craning head. I don't want to see anterior pelvic tilt, and I want them to be able to record their sets, which, is again, something I also encourage heavily, and be able to look at it and go like, damn, I'm proud of that set. Like, wow, that's a really good set. And also be able to look back on like 6 weeks ago and go, whoa, I improved. And I also added, like 20 kilos to my lift as well, so I like to try and immerse the two into one. But I do agree with the sentiment that, sometimes like the pursuit of, again, quote unquote, perfect technique gets taken too far. It does get taken too far. And, you know, as much as we talk about what's optimal on social media all the time, it's probably become a bit of a buzzword in a way. And I do think that sometimes, you know, if someone's technique is 5 or 10% off, but A, they're not going to get hurt, which is the main thing, and B, they're still doing enough to really quantify getting like a good result, then, you know, if they're enjoying that and they feel good about that, then I'm going to still big them up about that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that one of the things that I want to let permeate and teach my group is this, you know, a lot of people take pride in how much weight they lift, how many reps they got, you know, and they take pride comparing to others. And I want to take a lot of that, like where people generate pride from and their feeling of how well they're doing. And I want to put it more towards like paying homage to the movement, respecting the movement, like respecting doing it well. And I'd rather see people take less emotional like pleasure away from the actual just net number of weight that like pounds and reps they're doing, which by the way is super cool. It's cool to be strong. You're allowed to want to be strong. You hit a PR, that's Absolutely. Awesome. I'm cool with all that. But I want a technique PR to be as cool as like a weight PR, if not cooler, because I do think that it almost precedes, you know, this like I'd rather you first nail this technique. If I say nail it, that is kind of what we're talking about here. When I say nail it, I mean get it to a place where it's safe and effective, where you're going to get the result you want and you're not going to hurt yourself. And then from there, we can tinker. And I love the example that you said with the RDL. I think about head position in an RDL as being something that we talk about a lot. I put that in air quotes in comparison to how important it is. Like your head position, you could be in a ton of cervical extension. You could have your head all the way up. And that by itself is not dangerous, has no negative effect on the movement whatsoever. It just makes anterior pelvic tilt. It just makes lumbar hyperextension more likely when you do cervical extension. So when you have your head straight up and you're looking at the ceiling, it makes that anterior pelvic tilt, that hyperextension, what's going on kind of down the chain, it makes that more likely. And that can matter. And so if I'm commenting on somebody's technique and I look at their head position and their head is straight up, let's say it's totally up there looking at the ceiling. But then I look down from there and I'm like, okay, what's going on in their thoracic part of their back, the lumbar part of their back, their hips are going back, the knee position's good, depth is good, everything else is good. That is not a dangerous RDL. You're going to get the same results. Totally fine. I'll still probably tell you, hey, smidge of a chin tuck is probably a good idea. But like, we want to just keep that in context of like your RDL is safe, it's effective. This technique adjustment I'm telling you is not going to take it from unsafe to safe. It's not going to take it from ineffective to effective. It's just maybe going to be the thing that takes us from like 99% to 100%. And as we load heavier, maybe there's, you know, a technique breakdown. This will help prevent. And so it's like, here I am giving all this context. And I just feel like that sometimes can get so lost in a Instagram post that will do way better if I put a big fucking red X on it and a big green check on it. And I say, don't do this, stop doing this. And you and I both do that. I'm not like picking on either of us. We both do it. But I think we both also do a good job of adding the context of how important is this idea of how important is this thing I'm telling you needs to be talked about, because there's only so many things that we can mentally focus on. And if you get people like with this big, like losing the forest for the trees sort of situation, it's just important with every thing that we tell people to do. There's an attached, like, where does this fall in the pyramid, you know?
Yeah, 100%, man. And, you know, it's at the end of the day too, I think that's the distinguishing feature between social media and coaching, right? Is that with social media, it's not sexy to say that there's gray area. You know, people don't like to hear, well, it could be this, but it could be that, but it also could be neither, but it could be both, you know, whereas coaching, you know, you generally get to sit down with someone and have a conversation, whether it be Zoom, whether it be face-to-face, whether it be a Loom video, whether it be a WhatsApp, whatever you use. And you get to be like, look, well, you know, if it was me, I'd be looking to change this perhaps, but at the same time, if it's not causing any pain and the fact that, you know, your glutes are growing and, you know, all of this is happening and everything, who am I to say correct it? You know, sort of thing. Obviously, like you said, if you are having this whole kinetic chain starts to get thrown out by one cue, then obviously you want to fix that. Of course you do. And that's where, yeah, Instagram with the big red X and the big green tick and everything comes in.
Great for engagement.
Exactly. We want those saves. We want those shares, like get them up for me, get that algorithm going. But, you know, with coaching, it is always quite a gray area. And as I said before, it's very much like everyone's going to be slightly different. It's the old like spinal flexion in a deadlift argument, really, isn't it? It's like, you know, what quantifies dangerous spinal flexion flexion in a deadlift. Ask 100 different coaches, you probably get 100 different answers. But at the end of the day, they've probably all coached someone to a very, very impressive deadlift at some point in their career. So yeah, I think if people start kind of just, you know, taking the main things that you want to look at, and that's where social media is good. You can give the 3 kind of main cues that you would give for a lift. You go, you know, these are my 3 best cues for a successful RDL. And, you know, 95% of people are going to be happy with that. They're going to look really good. They're going to get it, sort of thing. But yeah, I definitely think that there is more gray area than we like to admit with things on social media. But, you know, it's at the end of the day, as long as people are getting the benefit from it, then I'm always happy to do the, you know, the big red X's and green ticks and whatever works, right?
Totally. Sometimes you got to give people what they want just so you can give them what they need. And so there's some element of that. And I also laughed super hard with I looked back. So we've all done an RDL post where we have put like a curve. We've put one person on the left who's in neutral and one person who's like in anterior pelvic tilt or lumbar hyperextension, and they have their head up. And we draw a straight line on one of them, and we draw this big curved line on the other one. This like big curved line, that would signify way too much extension in the spine. And there was a post recently that this person did that. And I just like for 1 second looked at the post that was like had this big curve drawn on it, and I like mentally blocked out that curve, and I was like, this person's RDL is beautiful. It is not curved like this little line is drawn. I'm like, neutral spine in air quotes. Neutral is a range. Neutral is not like this one specific point. Like you said, the whole spinal flexion thing. I just thought that was funny. And I looked back at my old RDL post where I fucking did the same thing, drew this curved line. And I was like, am I actually in hyperextension, or did I just draw this curve to like remind people not to make it look like this? And I just found that funny. My question to you is, and this could be, and I was thinking about it, this could be you, the person that I'm asking, it could be you back in the day. Like, do you find that people who find your page, they find biomechanics in big air quotes, they find this maybe N1 driven pursuit of optimizing technique, and they really latch onto it because they want, maybe it's their type A personality, maybe it's just like perfectionist mindset. And it ends up being a net negative, at least in the short term, because they immediately go from thinking they were doing things well to thinking they're not doing things well unless they're doing it perfectly, where they're like, you know, their elbow path for a rear delt is 5 degrees off. And all of a sudden it takes some of the fun out of it. Actually, have you experienced some people that like need to be reminded, hey, your technique is really good. Don't, you know, let it get you down until it's perfect. We need to kind of enjoy that process. Have you experienced that?
Absolutely. I mean, what's the first thing that we do when we learn something new? We go straight to the gym and we're like, I can try that. I want to do that. I want to do that. I'm going to put that in programs. I'm going to put it in my program. I'm going to do this in everyone's program. And it's just kind of like, you know, I actually did that myself last year. Yeah. Like after I'd done the biomechanics course by N1, I was kind of like, whoa, there's all these cool different things that I'd never thought about before. And I remember like in a specific check-in with Mark, and I messaged him. I was like, man, like, you know, can we do this? Can we do that? Can we do this? And he was just like, why? You know, he was like, you know, if you can give me a good reason to do it, he was like, go for it. And obviously, you know, Mark's like done all this N1 stuff as well. He, you know, knows Cassim very well, but he was like, you know, why do you need to change this? Like, why do you want to suddenly incorporate all of these exercises? You know, why do you want to suddenly like just rewrite the entire copybook of what we've been doing for the last 6 months just because you learned something new? He was like, you know, for example, all the lat stuff, he was like, yeah, 100%, we can do an iliac lat pull down. He's like, you know, I want you to start doing that anyway. Let's bring up your lower lats, you know, but why do we have to train all 3 divisions of the lat in one session when I've got you on a rotating split that only has you training back once every 6 days? He's like, I'd rather we covered the entire back because there are other muscles in the back, you know? And I think sometimes we get caught up on these like, you know, fancy variations and, you know, wanting to train all the different fibers because you learn all this different stuff. And you're kind of like, I've got to do my glute work, have to have 2 shortened movements and then 2 lengthened movements because I've got to have the upper fibers of the glute max and the lower fibers of the glute max. And I've got to get all my tempos to work with that. And I've got to balance out time under. And it's like, you know, all of this stuff is really good to know, but like, it just becomes this massive clusterfuck when you're trying to use it all at once. And I think, yeah, I get a lot of people coming to my page and being like, can you do this? Can you do that? Can you do this? Can you do that? And I'm like, Yeah, you can, but like have a reason for it. You know, for example, someone came to my page the other day and I posted about face pulls not being a good rear delt exercise. I answered a question in a Q&A and someone automatically messaged me and went, okay, so we don't ever do face pulls. And I was like, well, if rear delts are the goal, maybe not. Maybe do a rear delt row. But if you want upper back work, if you need external rotation work, if your shoulders are pretty fucked up and you need to work on shoulder health, then yes, you can do a face pull. You can do it from multiple different angles for different things if you'd like. You know, it's or like I did one on kettlebell swings the other day as well, and I was like, this isn't a good hypertrophy movement. But then people hear that and they're like, that means it's not a good movement at all. And it's like, well, you know, you can use that for football players or for someone who needs to develop explosive power or somebody who wants to, you know, suddenly like be swinging a heavy kettlebell and then deload that position to then bound further by dropping the kettlebell and go straight into a broad jump. Like, you know, just because it's not a good hypertrophy exercise doesn't mean it's not a good exercise. Yeah. So I think, yeah, I get a lot of, it's a very long-winded way of saying I agree with you. Like, I think a lot of people kind of do come to pages like yours, mine, and they kind of see terms and they're like, okay, it's not a good exercise for this, so it can't be a good exercise at all. Or they think, oh, it's a good exercise for this, so I'm just going to throw it in mindlessly with all the other stuff that I've got without realizing there's always got to be context and there's always got to be a bigger picture behind everything. You can't just go, I like that, I'm putting that in there, that's going to work, sort of thing, because it doesn't always. It might do sometimes, but it doesn't always.
Totally. It could be overwhelming at first. And it can be overwhelming from an excitement standpoint, like you were, and you're like, hey, Mark, we got to put all the shit in. And then Mark's like, well, why? And your reason probably would have been mostly just academically wanting to like practice it, but which is a fair reason, but like physiologically, maybe not throwing all of it at once. One thing that has cracked me up lately is just like, just generally the pendulum swing in this industry is just like, it's very fun to watch. Everything swings all the way to one side, swings to the other side. And when Kaz created, let's say the you know, his Kaz Glute Bridge, it swung and is still swung all the way in the direction of this is God's gift to earth. If you don't glute bridge, you will not gain muscle. Your glutes will never grow. And then it goes even deeper than that. And I'm just going to put one little example. It's like I have in my group, you know, we've done glute bridges quite a bit. It's like primarily a female program. Everyone's like, oh, I got to do glute bridge, got to do glute bridges. And, you know, I had like somebody message me. It was like, hey, you know, my glute bridge, I got my technique critiqued, you know, something, somebody said this to do this. And I was like, yeah, totally. That's cool. That will inch your technique smidge closer to optimal, let's say. But it is, if we look at the top like 5 things you need to do for the glute bridge that are going to get you 99% of the benefit, you're doing all of those. And so just, that's okay that you're going to take this critique and you're going to work on it. But just know that like you're in a neutral spine, you're hinging, your feet are in a good position, shins are vertical, you're not going too deep, you're not being explosive, you're pausing the top, your core, your ribs are down, whatever those top 10 things, you're already doing them. And she was like, more of saying it from like ugh, I'm not doing this right, this sucks. And that to me, just like it hurt, because I was like, if somebody else is giving you critique, they have to start or finish with, hey, but by the way, your form is fucking awesome and you're doing amazing and it's really fucking good already, comma, but if you want to. And so just that part kills me. And then the second part is specifically about the glute bridge. Even Kaz himself would agree. The glute bridge is overrated for glutes. It is a short position exercise primarily. And that is why it is beneficial, because it is, you know, sets itself apart by being a short position exercise from some of the stuff that we normally do for glutes, like presses, squats, split squats, all of that stuff, lunges. But, you know, in the scheme of things, a glute bridge is not the best glute exercise. So just, it becomes something that so many people are so fucking technically obsessed with right now. And just laughably, it's not the best glute exercise by far. It's not in the top 5, you know, because it's not working the lengthen position. And so I just find that part also a little bit funny.
Oh yeah, man, it's fascinating, isn't it? It's like, and I don't know what it is that takes certain exercises and blows them into like the forefront like that.
If it trains glutes, like, that's what trains your ass. That's what happens.
Oh man, like fucking sideways hack squats are fucking coming up next, aren't they? Yeah, I mean, look, like as you said, the Kaz bridge is an awesome exercise. Fantastic exercise, but like you said, you'd probably, if you had your checklist, you'd be like, okay, well, I'll probably maybe a trap bar RDL might be number one. And then I might go like a feet slightly high leg press where I can have that 90-degree angle and again, get the length in position. More things you can kind of play around with there too. It's like, do we want, a pause at the bottom? Do I want a quarter rep at the bottom potentially as well? Something different there. You got split squats for unilateral work, and to be honest as well, I know it's copying a lot of hate for some reason these days, but a regular hip thrust is just as good of an exercise to have in your arsenal for that specific job of training the short position. No. Okay. You do get more momentum. It is more of a sort of swing, if you will, like more momentum out of the bottom. And if you come to the floor, yes, more quads and adductors, but it's still a way of training that pattern that is a viable option to use in your program. And if someone comes to you and says, hey, I want glutes, but I also want a lot of quad work, you might go, I don't want to do too much direct quad work because I don't want to throw out any imbalances or anything, but I could just use a normal hip thrust where I can get a best of all worlds sort of thing. So yeah, it is funny. And it is funny that it's kind of this like new way of doing it, I guess, for people. Maybe they've done glute bridges off the floor and maybe they've done hip thrusts, but they've never done a glute bridge in hip thrust positions. So they're like, let's do that. Iliac pull down, I think, is another one that's kind of been, I think it's a fantastic exercise, but I think people just kind of go, okay, I want to do the chest supported one. Then I want to do chest supported single up. Then I want to do leaning on the bench single up. Then I want to do half kneeling. Then I want to do it on a lat pull down where I can pull from a little bit higher. And then, can I do a similar thing with a row? Let's try that for a different part of the lat. It's just kind of like, well, how about you just pick one of these movements and do it for 24 weeks, with some different rep ranges and some different tempos and get really good at it and then sort of see where you end up rather than being like, I want to do all 7 of these in the next 3 months. But like you said, it's the excitement factor, right? New is sexy. And, sometimes that can be a benefit too, because sometimes if you've got a client, for example, who's been, doing the same thing for 6 months and they are just bored as shit, like with their program, and they're kind of like, yeah, look, I'm not feeling this anymore. Then as long as you've got other things up your sleeve as a trainer, or just as someone who writes your own programs to be able to throw in to make things a bit more interesting, then it can go that other way too.
Yeah. So for one-on-one clients, every time their new program is up, we'll do a Zoom and we'll build their program together and they can get a peek inside what that process is like from my end. And I get really good real-time feedback from them, in that moment when we're building their program. And one of the, I'll usually say, like, if someone asks me, how do we know when it's time to switch out an exercise? It's one of 3 reasons. One is you've stopped progressing. I think that's the biggest one. It's like, it's actually an exercise that you've, quote, adapted to a degree where progress has slowed down. That's number one. I mean, if performance is not going up, then it's probably time to change that. It's become like, quote, stale, let's say. Number 2 would be like if your joints are hurting doing this movement, if you have some contraindication pain-wise that we need to swap this out. And number 3 is, motherfucker, if you're just bored of doing this exercise, or there is another exercise that you're just excited to do, that is a totally valid reason to implement that. I mean, it's a contentious one. Just if you're looking for what's physiologically optimal, then you can have that discussion of like, okay, maybe this isn't the best swap, but man, for 99% of people, myself included, I've actually recently I don't know, this is me growing into like a wiser old gentleman here, but I'm way more like, I'm finding out exercises that really either fit my structure, quote unquote, or things that I just get really locked in and dialed into. And when I pick those exercises instead of like what is like externally, I'm not saying I forget about what's physiologically optimal. I'm thinking about that too. But when I look at my program and it's full of stuff that I know I execute well and then I'm dialed into, it makes me way more motivated to train. Like I told my girlfriend, I was like, when I just pick like 4 or 5 movements that I know that I'm dialed into, the workout is always awesome. It's great. And so this idea of like, what do I just like doing needs to be in there when you're doing that programming process.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that's one of the perks of doing your own programming, right? Like nobody knows you better than you know yourself. And that's where for, any of your clients listening to this, any of my clients listening to this, any future clients, that's where when you have a coach, it's very important to have that open dialogue as well. And to remember that, like, me and Jordan, we're both big boys. Like we can take it. Like if somebody comes to me and goes like, I don't like this in my program, it doesn't feel good. And I've looked at their technique and their technique looks fine. And it's just a matter of them being like, this movement to me just feels unnatural. Bench press to me is one of those things. Like, Mark has a big like functional hypertrophy sort of approach, which I absolutely love because I get to push some numbers while still putting on a bit of size. It's great. I don't have to always just do machines and cables and stuff, but the options are always there as well. But bench press for me just feels really unnatural. Years of cricket and guitar and stuff, my right side is slightly like just winged scapula, a little bit internally rotated. And every time I press with a bar, I just feel like I get all weird and kind of rotate and stuff. So it just feels odd for me. But then, dumbbell press, machine press, all that sort of stuff feels great. So yeah, 100%. It's about just finding those movements that do work for you. But I also do think sometimes it's also that case of allowing movements to feel a bit more natural as well by fixing setups and stuff. But 100%, if your setup is 100% right, if you've lined everything up perfectly to a T, and you just can't progress, or it just feels wrong, or you just can't get the hang of it, then 100%, like there's no completely necessary movements for any muscle group.
Yep. I also think that when we're looking at this like perfectionist mindset, tempo is another thing that I find to be another moment where I'm like, okay, like chill, like it's good, and I'll put like my base tempo will be, I mean, if we just look at what the research says for hypertrophy, something like a 2 to 4 second eccentric in that range probably can be better than a 1 or 5 second or a 0 or 5 second eccentric, right? So we have this like 2 to 4 second eccentric, which could roughly just like verbally translate to, hey, control the eccentric. And then we see that generally we want forceful concentrics. So something like a one count tempo. And so like when I program like a 3-0-1-0, which would be roughly translated to like 3 seconds on the way down for an RDL, 0 second pause, 1 second on the way up, which is like a forceful stand up, and then no second pause at the top. I'll get people that are like, oh, my tempo's not right. It sucks. It's terrible. And I'll read that little blurb and then I'll click on the video and I'm like, their tempo's fine. Maybe it's like 2.5 seconds. It's like, I wrote 3 for a reason. Let's say I wrote 3 seconds. Okay, I wrote it. My intent was for you to do 3 seconds, but I don't want these sort of like, just remember, you wouldn't let something this small bother you in other aspects of life. If your shoes were tied like slightly less perfectly, like it wouldn't bother you. And I just want to make sure people are out there are like, yes, I wrote a 3 second eccentric, but if it's 2.4 seconds, if it's 2 seconds, if it's 4 seconds, it's still really freaking good. And so as long as we understand where in the hierarchy these things fit, like you can still enjoy yourself while working on these sorts of things.
Well, absolutely. I think, tempo for me, I use tempo more as a technique thing. So really like, yes, I will periodize, like say I've got a client who I'm trying to periodize their squat over 12 weeks. And I'm like, yeah, okay, I might start with pause reps. So I might start with a 2-2-1-0 tempo. So a 2 second eccentric, 2 second pause, strong concentric, then just enough time at the top to take a deep breath and brace before we go again. And then I might go into the next phase and go, okay, well, now that we've developed that kind of explosive power out of the bottom from a dead stop, now let's take that pause away, but we're going to control that eccentric to make sure that we've got tightness all the way down, not just in the hole. And then maybe, I might go from that into possibly even like a 1.25 rep phase or something like that to really make use of the stretch reflex. And then we come around to like that phase 4 where we can just go, all right, like screw it. You've really, now we've had like 12 weeks where, I'm really stressing your technique in different parts of the movement and in different ways to almost kind of find where your technique breaks down, almost kind of trigger that in a way. And kind of consolidate all those parts of the movement. And then by, phase 4, yeah, cool. We can go and like push some big numbers because now we're locked in. We've done 12 weeks of these horrible grinding things. But yeah, like I do think it is a little bit of an overrated thing for hypertrophy at times, just because I see people doing all this like massive tempo manipulation where they're like, has to be a certain amount of seconds, has to be this, has to correspond to time under tension like this, has to be this, has to be that. But then I'm just sitting there thinking, well, for example, let's say we've got a cable drag curl, use that example because I was doing them today, and they're one of those exercises that for me just feels awesome. And I might see a coach put a 2-0-1-2, so a 2 second hold in the squeeze. And I'm kind of like, well, tension in that movement is going to be most significant, more so towards that kind of mid to lengthened range. So yes, you've added time under tension, but how significant was that tension that you've added in there? What was the reason behind that? If you want to have that tension, why not put it at the other end of the movement instead? Yes, okay, your client's going to be able to probably use less load because you're now making them spend more time where it's harder. But isn't that then the point of having the tempo and the time under tension, is having it in that significant portion of the movement? So yeah, like I personally love tempo. I program with it a lot, but I do subscribe to the fact that it has to be there for a reason. And it also doesn't always have to be there. Like you said, there's nothing wrong with doing a movement with a controlled 2-second eccentric and a strong concentric, especially if you're doing 8, 10, 12, 15, 20 fucking reps. Nobody wants to be sitting there going 1, 2, 3, 4 for 20 reps, man. Like, come on, my mental fatigue would give in before my physical fatigue does.
True that. Yeah, let's talk about the good. I think that it's like we both spent enough time venting about like wanting to add context and making sure people don't, get so type A that they don't have fun. Let's talk about the good. What are some of the things that when we talk about technique, exercise selection, biomechanics, all this stuff, what are some things that actually do make a big difference, you think, to people, to your own training, that are worth working on improving, that like actually you're like, hey, this is like, I'm happy that we're working on this sort of thing. Could be a mindset, could be a specific exercise. And yeah, we'll go back and forth with a few.
All right. Well, I like that you said mindset there, because that's actually something that I've been really enjoying seeing a lot more content about lately from creators and stuff. And that's that mindset of, getting into a set and just thinking to yourself, I got this. Like, I have got this, putting aside everything else, putting aside like, having to have completely optimal technique, putting aside where are our resistance profiles in our workout, what part of the strength code, just getting into a set and having a positive mind frame about the exercise you're doing and about that set and about crushing that weight and about like absolutely just, especially if it's a PB or something like that. I think that's so important. And I'm really liking seeing this now, like kind of positive, very much like affirmation based mindset. Because I think there was a lot of stuff that went around TikTok last year, especially on kind of like, failing lifts and lots of memes around failing lifts and that. Whereas now there seems to be like a lot more content coming out, pushing like, positivity around setting PBs and hitting big lifts and all that sort of stuff. And, I don't know if you've seen as much of it as I have, but yeah, like I'm really loving that. Like I'm really loving the idea of, telling people, get ready for a lift, like listen to some heavy music, listen to some stuff you love, pump yourself up and just get under that bar and just like crush it.
I love that. That's awesome. It's funny. I don't know if we use PB in America. We say the PR. I don't know if that's actually, I might be not true, but like, no, I just heard that. I'm like, people are like, are they fucking talking about peanut butter? These guys, it's like getting pumped up to get this jar of peanut butter. No, but okay. Yeah. No, I love that one.
I'm pretty pumped up for peanut butter, man.
Oh, 100%.
I'm pretty pumped up.
Most of my answers that I made a couple notes for were actually not like, hey, this arm path for iliac lats has changed the world. Most of them were more vague, more mindset based, kind of like yours. I think that one of the things that's changed maybe how I coach and hopefully how my clients enjoy their training is understanding that how different movements will work or look different for different people. And so understanding that, like, you have long femur, short tibia, short torso, it's going to look different than if you have a different ratio of those limb lengths. And so understanding that, like, when we're talking about a glute emphasis squat, that your glute emphasis squat and somebody else's glute emphasis squat won't look the same. Your quad emphasis squat, and for me, being able to communicate that to people has been massively helpful, because otherwise you get into this, like, this is what it's supposed to look like. And then when it doesn't look like that, I mean, if you have a long torso and a long femur, guess what? All of your squats are going to be glute dominant. You are hinging at the hip and your glutes are just going to have to travel further back because of how long that femur, how long your torso, but you can still do your best by elevating your heels, letting your knees drive forward, and staying relatively upright, and we can get a little bit more quad. But I just think of a couple people in my group who got into this like real like analysis paralysis of my squat doesn't, and because when you post your form videos, they all go to, like, let's say the same running chat. And so people watch other people's form video, which I think can be massively helpful because you can see what I'm saying to them and you can watch kind of from the outside, which is awesome. Some people don't feel super comfortable sending form videos. Most people do, but if you don't, and you can watch other people's, it's still helpful. But it's understanding that, like, the cue that Jordan's giving here might not be exactly or the end result of what this person's. Right now we're doing front heel elevated, rear foot elevated split squat. And so that exercise really lengthens the back leg rec fem. Like, that is one of the main points of the reason we are doing it. Our setup is with a little bit more of an upright torso, and probably not as much front knee flexion, so that we can really get that full lengthening in that rec fem, stay in complete hip extension. And that's cool. But, like, that requires actually a decent amount of strength and, quote, mobility, flexibility in those hip flexors, in that rec fem. And so not everybody's technique is going to look exactly the same. And I think for me, this knowledge has at least helped other people enjoy it more, because I've understood more that it's not all going to look exactly the same for everybody.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And I agree wholeheartedly. And that actually, like, one of the other things that I wrote down for this one, when you sent me the questions beforehand, was that, to kind of like carry that on is the use of other equipment, right? So, being able to use heel wedges, even though somebody else might not need it, right? So for example, myself, I've got shit ass ankle dorsiflexion, always have done, the very, very tight right one, especially. Again, I think it comes from cricket when I was younger. So I use a lot of wedges because it really helps me get that knee flexion. And there is nothing wrong with that. Things like safety bars and things like trap bars and stuff, and understanding that just because one person loves a conventional deadlift or one person loves a conventional RDL doesn't mean that you have to, and doesn't mean that you have to do that. It might be that a trap bar works for you better because, you can't get yourself into that position. Or, if a client comes to me with some like issues in their shoulder and they're like, I just can't squat. I really want to squat, but I can't. It's like, well, okay, well, let's get under the safety bar. There's nothing wrong with the safety bar. The name kind of sounds a little bit lame, like the safety bar, like I want the danger bar. But, it's like, it's just as good an option, if not better for some people. Personally, I love the safety bar. I use it a lot for my squats now rather than having to be in that locked back position. I don't really like it as much. So I definitely agree with that. I think, everybody has their own variations that need to be adhered to and stuff. And I actually posted about this today. It's one of those things that I changed my mind on as a coach over the years is, squat, bench, and deadlift. We don't all need to be doing that with a barbell in, power lifter conditions and all that sort of stuff, right? There's always going to be a variation of that movement pattern that's going to work best for someone else, dependent on goal, dependent on who the person is, dependent on where they're at with their training, depending on, even just like, as you said, their movement mechanics. Like, some people are just going to be better suited to do different variations, and that is fine. In fact, that's really cool. It makes us all unique. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and that blends in well with the one I was going to say, which was like it's funny because that we learn all about what is optimal. You could look at a program and you could say, okay, is this optimal for hypertrophy? Is a conventional deadlift optimal for hypertrophy? And you could look at any program in any context and make critique. You could. But actually, one of the tools that it's given me is actually to be able to do things that are, quote, let's say suboptimal for hypertrophy. Most of the people listening to this are interested in hypertrophy. You can actually do things that are suboptimal for hypertrophy, but because you, as the coach, are knowledgeable about the downsides of certain things, that you can then complement the program with things that kind of make up for that. So you mentioned face pulls. I don't think face pulls are the world's greatest rear delt exercise for hypertrophy. They're not. They're also not the world's greatest upper back exercise for hypertrophy. But you mentioned external rotators. And you might say, you know what, in this block, I really want that to be something that we are working on. So we're gonna put face pulls in. But I also know, hey, maybe we want to complement this with something more direct for rear delt, something more direct for upper back. And so maybe there are clients who want to do conventional deadlifts. You explain to them, hey guys, this is like, this is a little bit not a great SFR, not a good stimulus to fatigue rate. You can explain that till you're blue in the face. They want to do deadlifts. So you might say, okay, we're doing deadlifts, suboptimal in certain circumstances, might be a little bit less good, let's say, for biasing length into glutes, let's say, than if we did like a floating trap bar, bent knee deadlift or something like that. And so you might now know, okay, I know how to complement this thing that has certain downsides with something that makes up for that. And so it's really like, it's funny because even though you learn, you're like, well, I'm just going to use everything that's optimal. It actually allows you to then do things that are slightly suboptimal and make them not as bad because you know how to complement them. You know where they're not great. You know where their vacancies are and where you can fill that void. And so I found that myself, like, I want to ask you a direct question of like, is there something in your program that for your training that is suboptimal for hypertrophy that you like, or could arguably be suboptimal for hypertrophy that you're doing anyway because fuck it, you like it, and it's something that you're going to keep in your program?
To be honest, at the moment, no, because unfortunately I don't write my own programs.
Well,
So,
would you say you're barbell benching right now, and so you could make an argument that say barbell bench, we're not getting that adduction, we're not training that function of the pecs basically nearly as much as if you were using dumbbells. You're probably not able to like get an optimal arm path to bias basically any part of the pecs, but you might say I fucking love doing it, and I have other pec exercises that complement the hell out of this.
Well, yeah, that is true. Although you did say I have to like the exercise.
That's fair.
But no, for example, like one that I could give is pull-ups. Okay, so like Mark loves pull-ups. I fucking love pull-ups. Like pull-ups are like, probably pull-ups and dips are my two like favorite exercises to do for upper body. I just love it. I love the ability to do a body weight exercise and then just wrap a whole bunch of plates around my waist on a belt. Like it's just, there's no more badass feeling than that. But a pull-up is probably, yeah, when you talk about like stimulus to fatigue ratio, and you talk about actually being a good hypertrophy exercise, you could just do pull downs. Like you really could. You could do so many better exercises for, just straight hypertrophy, just really like locking in that stimulus. But then also, you could argue, I love the functional hypertrophy side of things, whereby you do push a bit more of a strength stimulus in your A series and you kind of periodize that over weeks. And then all your accessories are more that sort of typical 8, 10, 12, 15, whatever sort of, standard hypertrophy rep ranges and stuff, if you will. But it's then that argument of kind of like, as you said before, filling in the gaps. And it's like, with the pull-ups, okay, that exercise in itself probably not going to be the most beneficial for hypertrophy directly, but indirectly, is that then going to improve my upper body pulling strength? Is it also going to improve my grip strength? Is it going to improve my ability to create stability, in a very unstable environment, and, potentially also increase my core strength? Yeah, it's probably going to tick a whole bunch of those other boxes too, which are then going to have carryover when I go and do movements in more stable environments, whereby I don't have to recruit those stabilizing muscles. So I suppose as well, it's being able to have that trade-off sometimes. And, if a client wants to do a deadlift, it's like, that's probably, one of the bottom
Least
of the pile
good.
for
Least good.
I don't want to say like the worst, but it's like it's down there. Options for hypertrophy, especially because you're probably looking at like, really, do you want to be doing more than 5-6 reps at a time? Probably not. Is there any real time under tension? Probably not. However, is it going to then potentially improve their lower body strength in other areas? Yeah, possibly. I mean, if they get really good at that, then there's going to be nothing to stop them getting really good at other hinging movements and potentially really good at glute bridges and stuff like that as well. So yeah, I mean, it's filling in those gaps, and it's being able to kind of accept that sometimes you have to do something a little bit less optimal to be able to then bring up the more, quote unquote, optimal parts of a program, I suppose.
Yeah. And one you even just mentioned there was like, if you were sticking to like a true N1 methodology, you wouldn't mix rep ranges really. You'd mix a little bit in there, but there'd have to be good reason. But you certainly wouldn't do power building, you know what I mean? That would go against, and so, but power building might tick your boxes personally, not you, but one's boxes for the balance of what they want, which is not optimal hypertrophy, which is like, I love deadlifting and I want to do squat bench dead, but I also want that to not be the primary focus. And so there is some element of like in my group program where like I'm trying to, let's say I'm writing the program and I'm like, okay, what's the stimulus? We're going to work back from that. What's the rep range? What are our tools for achieving that stimulus? And then I'll be like, you know what, but like, maybe we're also going to do this, throw in a myo rep set or something like that, because that can be like emotionally stimulative. That can be fun. It can be, this sort of like burn, and it doesn't deviate from hypertrophy. It's just slightly deviating from this perfect stimulus. And so I do think that there are times where we're doing that and feeling totally fine with it and understanding that where that deviation falls in the hierarchy of what's important, which is like not very much. We're coming up on an hour here. I want to be respectful of your time. It's fucking 11 o'clock over there. So like,
you're good, man.
You're good? Okay. We got a couple more minutes.
We're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So, all right, let's end with like, just understanding a little bit about kind of how, let's give like a little summation of like how people can think about going about improving their technique and doing it in a positive mindset. Let's just close things down with that.
Yeah. So I think, as we said, kind of towards the start of the show, I think it's approaching training as its own kind of anomaly. So it's kind of looking at whatever you're training for, whatever it is that you're currently pursuing as your fitness goal. You've got all your segments, right? With your nutrition, you've got that segment that's outside of the gym, potentially a little bit of intra-workout nutrition if you have that as well. But generally, that's outside of your gym. You've kind of separated that from training. That's what's going to kind of help fuel your performance and potentially really be the driver for your body composition. If you're eating too much and you want to lose fat, change that. If you're not eating enough and you want to gain muscle, change that sort of thing. You've then got your sleep and your recovery. You approach that as a separate aspect as well. What are you doing to switch off? What are you doing to put yourself into a parasympathetic state after training? What are you doing to be able to get enough sleep? What are you supplementing with to make sure that you're recovering, you're not sore? You're taking magnesium and things like this. So I always think with training as well, it's kind of separating it from the rest and being like, when I go into the gym the sole goal in there should be to have the best workout that I can possibly have. And, even if you are someone who is emotionally attached to lifting a lot of weight, chances are that's going to happen more often and more consistently if you're doing it with really good technique, because good technique generally brings with it strength gains and ability in other areas. So I think if people are going to just go about trying to improve their technique and get better at lifting, that should just be the goal when you go into the gym. And that should be a good goal. That is a fun goal to chase, to be able to go in and go, I nailed that set. Especially if you're someone who's been getting pain, or if you've been having issues with certain lifts, it's really good to be able to go in. If you've been getting back pain on squats for 3 months and all of a sudden you do a session of squats and you didn't get a single bit of back pain at all, and you come out of that feeling breezy, you went through every other exercise feeling great, you wake up the next morning and the only pain you've got is DOMs in your quads and your glutes, then fucking A, that's amazing.
Yeah, I love that. That's really great. I have a more important question, is Liverpool going to do the quadruple?
Oh, man. No, we're not. I wish we would. Obviously, we've got one in the bag already. I think we beat Chelsea in the FA Cup, which my brother's a Chelsea fan, so brings me good joy.
Great joy.
I also do think that we, touch wood, got wood under this table here. I do think that we do over Villarreal in the semifinals. And then I do think that whoever we play in the final, there's just something about this football club in Champions League finals. And I do think that we take that one. However, I do think that City are not dropping a single point for the rest of the season. Unfortunately, they're going to be very, very worthy champions, but I think unfortunately they are going to be champions of the Premier League. So, yeah, 3 out of the 4 would be amazing. 2 out of the 4 would be freaking amazing. But maybe, fingers crossed. Who knows?
I think you guys have the hardest game left this weekend. Tottenham would be the hardest game that either team has left. Tottenham is the only team. Honestly, Tottenham might be the hardest other game other than City, for you guys. Just the way they play, they're just going to sit back and do what they try. They're going to try and do what they did to City. They beat City twice doing it, and I think they're going to just be like, hey, we're going to sit back, and Kane and Son are going to nick a goal at some point. And so I as an Arsenal fan, I need you guys to beat them. You must beat them. If they take a point, we're screwed. So you guys got to do that, and definitely rooting for you guys. I think it's actually we're going to look back 10, 15, 20 years from now, and it's going to be underrated. I don't know when the last time we had 2 teams that were this good, because if either team didn't exist, the other team would be talked about as the greatest dynasty. We'd be talking about a 10-year dynasty. If Liverpool didn't become this good, Man City would have just been winning everything for a decade. Oh, yeah. And so if they didn't exist, then you guys would have, you guys had the 2 most points ever in history a couple of years ago, or last year, or something or 2 years ago. One team didn't win. And so that's just been a crazy thought of mine. It's one team didn't exist, you guys would be the greatest team of all time, potentially.
Yeah, well, my roommate came in earlier today, and he was or it was yesterday or something, and he was Premier League table over the last 5 years. And it was something like Man City, 346 points, Liverpool, 345. And then third best was Chelsea on 260 or something like that. Yeah. It's just, that's insane. For those of you who don't follow soccer, that's a 23 win difference over the course of that. That's 4 wins a season, which on average, these good teams lose maybe 4 or 5 games a season. It's insane. It's it's crazy. It's good fun to be a part of as a Liverpool fan. But at the same time, you do kind of wish City didn't exist, just because then we'd have a few more trophies, but it is what it is, right?
Yeah. I was also laughing as you were saying that you were studying music, and I'm there's just that I was going to say meme of the guy who plays guitar, and then he's always it's in the background. You're I'll grab it. I'll play you guys something. I thought for sure it would be in the background, and you'd be if you want me to play something, I can. It's definitely sitting.
Man, if you want me to play
I knew it. I fucking knew it, dude. That's hysterical. I fucking knew it. I was should I ask him to play something? No, we're good, man. I appreciate you coming on. Go get some sleep. Tell everybody where they can find you. If they don't follow you, they absolutely should.
I appreciate you having me, man. Thank you very much. If you guys want to follow me, if anything I've said's kind of resonated, apologies for sounding very much half asleep. But my Instagram handle is just Jack Hallows Fitness, JackHallows Fitness. And you can also find me at the Atlas website. I'll give Jordan a link to post that in the Spotify bio or something like that. But yeah, main place to find me is Instagram. I do post some good stuff that's helpful some of the time, and I like to post a lot of memes on my stories. So if you like
Nice
laughs and good content, then come on over.
All right, cool, man. Thanks for coming on. I'll see you later.
Beautiful. Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.